In this video, we're going to talk about basic principles of technique. Now, stand-up paddlers come in all shapes and sizes. People are different heights, different weights, and even if they're the same height and the same weight, the lengths of their bones between joints might be different. Like, for example, from shoulder to elbow or elbow to wrist, maybe those bones may be different lengths. And even if those bone lengths were the same, it's pretty certain that the origin and insertion of muscles that cross those joints are going to be in different places. So we're all different. And for that reason, it's really unrealistic to expect that people are going to paddle exactly like each other or exactly like one of the top paddlers that they would like to model their technique after. The point I want to make here is the technique that's right for you is the one that works most effectively for you, that allows you to move the board most effectively and efficiently through the water. But there are 5 principles of technique that you really need to pay attention to. The first one is to take your paddle, reach forward, get the blade in the water, gather water behind your blade, hold that water behind your blade, and that's what's going to allow you to pull yourself by the paddle. That's what you're doing to move your board forward. And you need to do that really, really effectively. The second thing that's important is to use big muscles in your body, preferentially over small muscles. So we want to make sure that we're using big muscles of the core, the middle of our body, our hips, which is the most heavily muscled joint in the body, the big muscles of our upper body and our legs, rather than using our arms when we paddle. Another thing that's really important is to try to do as much as possible with a positive blade angle, where the blade is in front of us through to vertical. That's the most effective range for moving our board forward and pulling ourselves by the paddle. When the blade gets negative back here behind us, it's not nearly as effective for moving the board forward. So we want to do most of the work with a positive blade angle. We also want to get our body weight take it from being inside the board to outside the board and over the water. That's going to allow us to do a better job of creating force that is going to move our board by the paddle that we've got secure in the water. But it's also going to take the board, make it lighter in the water. If I can take my 185 pounds and put 30 to 40% of it outside the board onto the blade, it makes the board lighter and sit higher in the water with less wetted surface. And that means that it's going to be easier to move across the water. And then the last thing that's really important in our technique is not to do things when our blade's out of the water, between strokes, that messes up the forward run of our board. So we want to do everything possible to maintain a smooth forward run until we get to the next stroke. And all of the little things that you hear people talk about, like how they stand on the board, or how much bend they have in their knees, or how much bend they have in their arm, their top arm, or where they hold their hands in the paddle, are really open to preference. There's lots of things that people can do to try to address those 5 basic principles that I've talked about. And how they choose to do that is really up to them. It's almost like we're given a problem and we have to solve it all for ourselves, each in our own way, and try to find a way to address those 5 principles that works best for us, most effectively for us. So when you see drills that we do at Paddle Monster, when you see exercises on technique, we're going to be focusing on addressing how to achieve those 5 basic things.